Hello and welcome to Bury Our Bones with Cinema, the podcast that lives, breathes and dies classic movies, not so classic movies and everything in between. Joining me today is the Jennifer Saunders to my Dawn French, the Raquel to my Del Boy, the wife herself, Hannah Etherington. In today's episode, we enter the world of witchcraft and wizardry with 2001 franchise starter Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. So join us as we make friends with several long-bearded wizards, return to send her 1,000 Hogwarts letters, and finally wonder how Professor Quirrell gets to bed at night with he who must not be named literally snoring his head off.
Exclusively only on Orangutan Records, Jake Fratelli sings the classics. The Standard Outfit.
So the year is 2001, November 16th, 2001. At that point, we only knew Harry Potter in the book series. And this was its first foray into the world of cinema. Can you remember your first kind of inklings into Harry Potter, the world of Harry Potter and the film of Harry Potter?
I generally don't think I can. Like, when you've just said that it's 2001, like my brain just goes, my goodness me, that was what, 20, I can't do the maths.
23 years.
23 years ago. So we would have been, when this came out, I would have been 10.
Yeah, you'd have been 10, I'd have been 9.
That just blows my mind. Like, I don't actually think I remember potentially seeing. Well, I don't know if I did. I don't know if I saw it in the cinema. Maybe I didn't, or maybe I only saw it when it, like, maybe like a couple of ones after. Because I think back then, obviously where you're younger, you don't really know, I suppose, about sort of franchises and sequels and like...
Yeah, your sort of memory of things becomes a little bit warped, doesn't it?
Like, about the closest, like, my sort of parents would have been Star Wars. But obviously that's backwards in itself, because you had ones that come out and then they go and say, oh no, this is the one from this time, and it's all a bit confusing. But as a 10-year-old, I wouldn't have known that, I need to watch these in a certain order. So I probably didn't actually watch the first one until, I don't know, maybe 13, 14. But even then, like, I feel like I remember it more from watching it when I'm older than I do when I was younger.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, excuse me. From my perspective, I have sort of very, very clear memories of this. Now, I didn't go and see it in the cinema at the time. I can remember, so basically, when I was younger, every Saturday, my mum used to take either me and my sister or one of us shopping with my nan. It used to be like every Saturday, mum would go shopping with nan and one of us or both of us would go with her. And I can remember this one particular Saturday. I'm presuming it must have been probably more 2002, because the film had already been out in the cinema. And we walk into what was then called Safeway at the time.
Safeway.
Taking some English memories back there. And I don't know if you remember them. You used to have those like plinth things, which was obviously marketing around the film or whatever film it was at the time or whatever it is. And it used to have like slots where you could pick up at that time it was VHS.
Oh my goodness. V8. I don't remember Harry Potter being on VHS. I remember it being on DVD.
Yeah.
But I don't remember it.
So at the time in 2001, we still were working on VHS. DVDs were out, but they were much more expensive. And
or maybe that's just me for my only child syndrome.
Maybe. But we were still on the VHS market. And I remember walking into Safeway and there being one of these marketing plinth things, and there being lots and lots of copies of this thing called Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. And I'd never read the books, didn't really read books as a kid. I was more into like films, video games and toys and stuff like that. Wrestling, yeah. So I didn't even really know what it was, but all I can remember is that very, very iconic, what's on the DVD cover now and was on that VHS cover, and it being in almost like a baby blue kind of VHS. And I think for me, the thing that attracted me to VHSs sometimes was what colour the actual cases were. So, like, even if it was like a film I would never be interested in, if it had a slightly different coloured case, I'd be, rather than the usual standard either black or clear
or white. That needs to be one.
White. But if it had like a red one or a green, whatever
orange,
it was,
orange was the best because you knew that was like a Nickelodeon movie or something.
So this was a blue one. So that's kind of my first inkling. And I remember usually it would be at least an hour going around the shop, and I must have probably out of that hour spent 59 minutes and 30 seconds going to my mum. Can we get that? Can we get that video? Can we get that video? And every time my mum would be like, no, you can't get the video. You've had too much this month. And it would have been, I'm presuming, around coming up to like Christmas period. So probably, well, you never know what, Father Christmas is going to bring. Yeah. And naturally, my nan, she circled back, put it in her basket, and I can just hear my mum going, Mum, what are you doing? I've said he can't have it. Oh, don't be so silly. Don't be so silly, you can have. So that was my kind of, and I remember going home, and I don't know if we watched it that evening, but we watched it very soon after with me, my mum and my dad. I don't think my sister watched it. So I have quite sort of very fond memories. And from that point, much like a lot of people, we were off to the races. It kind of grew from there. Every Harry Potter that came out, I kind of wanted to see. If I didn't go to the cinema to see it, I tried to get it either on video or on DVD or something, or waited until it came on the TV.
Which I don't remember them being on the TV that soon after. It took a fair few years to be on TV.
Nowadays they're always on the telly.
Goodness,
but at the time, it would have been probably 2 years after. So probably we waited a long time to see Chamber of Secrets, most probably, because I don't remember getting that on DVD or video or seeing it in the cinema. So
I think I remember seeing Chamber of Secrets in the cinema, but I think in terms of Philosopher's Stone, I think I know I've still got the DVD of it at home somewhere, and I know that was what was in the DVD player like all the time, and the way like the menu screens would go and they just keep like looping and looping and looping. I remember that for quite some time. But I think we were almost too young to, I suppose, get the hype at that time, or we almost kind of needed to be, I suppose, your sister's age to really understand sort of the hype, follow that through to sort of late teens, adulthood, when like Deathly Hallows and all of that sort of came out.
Yeah, I would definitely say it would have been a good couple of years before that hype started to like register with me. Because I mean, I think I can remember it. I probably would have been around Prisoner of Azkaban sort of period, probably.
Azkaban or Azkaban?
However you say it.
Prisoner of Azkaban.
Yeah,
that's a whole different movie.
Yeah. So it would have been around that sort of time where I think it probably started to register, and I think it took me by surprise a little bit, because I was a kid who was a little bit nerdy and always liked things and not necessarily everybody liked. So as I mentioned, anybody who's listened to this podcast knows that I like wrestling. Well, for me, I was probably the only kid in my school who liked wrestling. So I was used to liking things that only I liked.
Yeah.
And then when I sort of started seeing other people or, on the TV a bit more and seeing all of these like mentions of Harry Potter, which is something I quite liked, I was like, huh? Oh, okay. This must be.
There's other people out there that like the things that I like. Oh, this is weird.
So let's just have a quick graze through the plot for anybody who has been living under a rock since 2001.
Literal rock.
Because this film has become so ingrained certainly in British culture, and it's almost a surprise if anybody hasn't seen them. Like, I know my sister and her husband haven't seen them.
What?
May have seen like bits of one, but they've never been on board with it. And I wonder if it's because
she was older.
Because she was older, and it was something I chose,
maybe,
almost as an act of defiance, because her little like geeky brother liked it. Oh, I don't like that kind of thing.
And I suppose she was already it's an odd one. It's like she was almost past the I believe in fantasy, witches, wizards, all this sort of stuff.
I think for me, there was definitely an element of I kind of identified a little bit with Harry. Like, obviously, I had a much nicer childhood than he did,
and not a scar on your forehead.
But I kind of identified with the kind of being a bit of a loner and not really feeling, not feeling sort of like you belong in certain sort of areas. Like, I wasn't a particularly popular kid at school. I had friends, but it wasn't like I was one of the popular kids. And, you know, Harry is very much that with Ron and Hermione. He's not the popular kids. They're close friends, you know. Obviously, no, if I walked into a room and people said my name, not everybody looked around saying, oh my God, that never happened.
Oh my God, it's Ryan.
Yeah.
The boy who lives.
Yeah.
No, like,
that would have been a bit weird.
Because that's a whole different safeguarding issue.
Yeah. So the plot. So, Harry Potter, an orphan living with his cruel relatives, learns on his 11th birthday that he is a wizard. He is taken to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, where he befriends Ron Weasley and Hermione Granger. At Hogwarts, they discover a secret about the Philosopher's Stone, also known as the Sorcerer's Stone in US markets, a magical object that grants immortality. The trio faces various magical challenges to prevent the stone from falling into the hands of Voldemort, the dark wizard who killed his parents.
Sorry, you just named him.
Well,
you should not be named.
I am a maverick. I'm a renegade. I don't care.
Bloody Dementors are going to come flying through that door in a minute. You've said it now.
Yeah, well, I'm ready. Yeah, so it was a massive phenomenon at the time, and it's weird because obviously the books came out sort of mid to late 90s, and I can't remember the books before I remember the film, but obviously they were there. Obviously they were a thing before and there will be people who say, oh, the books are better than the film, and people who say the film are better than the books. But I think it all comes around sort of like your first kind of, when you first experienced it becomes what, so for me, and probably for you as well, it's the films that kind of hold most kind of memories and most, feel like most part of that story rather than the books. So,
well, I'll say it now and I'll get a load of hate for it, but I've never read the books. I'm so sorry. But
I think I've read the first 4.
Okay. That's better than I got.
I remember an ex-girlfriend was really obsessed with it and tried to get me into them, so I think I read them just
to please her.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
But we'll gloss over that. But yeah, so yeah, I think it all depends on what you experienced first, whether it's the film or the books, is probably going to be what you prefer. It's not, exclusively like that way, but obviously there are some differences between the books and the films. Naturally so, with any adaptation, there's going to be differences, and there's going to be things that you can do in novels and in written literature, but there are things that you can't do on screen and vice versa. So I think the only real way to kind of explain how successful this film was is to go through the box office and its figures.
Because I'm very intrigued, because as you say, you're coming from a book. Well, it wouldn't even been a book franchise by that point, would it?
I think at that point there was. I probably should have researched this a little bit, but I think the first 3 or 4 were out at the time of this, because I certainly remember them coming out with Order of the Phoenix at my sort of teen years,
right,
where it was a big thing because they came out. You had the children's cover, and then you had the adult cover that you could get in like Sainsbury's or what have you.
Did. I remember that now. Yeah.
So, and it was like a big thing. It's like, oh my God, I'm going to go and get the new Harry Potter book. So I think the first 4 were out at the time of the release of obviously the first book was out. So yeah, so this film was made on a very large budget of $125 million, which is about just under 100 million quid. And it, adjusted for inflation, if you were to make this film today on the same budget, you'd be looking at just shy of 225 million.
Wow, blimey!
In its opening weekend,
apologies,
it made $90 million back in a space of 3 days. So you've almost made back your very large $125 million budget back before you even get a week in, which is insanely good. Domestically, it made 318 million. So before it even goes worldwide, you've doubled and then some your budget.
That's insane.
Worldwide gross, it became the second highest grossing film at that time, with a worldwide gross of $1,026,409.
Wow.
Which in today's money, that works out at 1.8 billion. So it's very much in that Avengers Endgame, Avengers Infinity War, Avatar, all of
That's
those.
what I was going to ask. What is it? To put into perspective, as you say, what other films have done, like that sort of level?
Yeah, and for obviously it's based on a pre-existing thing, but it's still a thing where, you know, I can remember the Hunger Games when that first came out, and that was based on it. And I know that that's not your kind of thing.
No, see, I can't remember the Hunger Games when it came out, probably because, as you say, it isn't my thing.
Yeah, but I can remember that, and it didn't seem quite as big, and it didn't seem, you know, like there's lots of things that have been based on novels that have made their way into the world of cinema, but that doesn't automatically guarantee success. It, you know, obviously it guarantees that you're going to get a certain level of intrigue, but to make back $1 billion on a first film of a franchise, it was. If this film had failed, I don't know, we probably would still have got the rest of the franchise, but to what extent it would be vastly different.
I think, you wouldn't have had like the last book split into two and stuff, and to get two films out of it, and you wouldn't have all of this, like you've got Potter World like everywhere. You've got I mean, what is it? Is it Universal or is it Walt Disney?
Warner Brothers.
Yeah, you've got all of that there. You've got the one in London. There's probably one in like Japan or whatever it is. And it is that thing of and you've got like 1 million pop-up shops in London to buy like robes and wands, and it is like a multi-billion, trillion, gazillion dollar. I don't know. I can't think of the words.
Franchise.
That's the one. Franchise.
Yeah. And it does literally all go back to this, because we were watching it yesterday, and obviously it has very nostalgic memories for us, and it has very, you know, we were there and we were quoting it before the lines came up, you know, how many are there? But last year. Exactly. That's the film for us. And, you know, for us, we spend our lives often, if somebody asks the question, how many are there? Immediately afterwards,
36, counted them myself.
You're going to get that quote, you know, and I think that's the same for a lot of people. But for this film to really hit off, everything had to fall into place. You know, we've had other franchises where it started and the casting may not have been particularly great or not had the same, you know, power, and to the point where you may get, you know, the first two of a thing, but it never quite finishes, or whatever it may be. But here, every single casting choice, every single choice that first film makes, I'm not going to say perfect, because I don't really know what perfection looks like in cinema, really, but there isn't anything I would change about that first film.
No.
Like, I think there was definitely a point when I was getting sort of 13, 14, 15, where I kind of rebelled a little bit and thought Harry was a bit of a job's worth, a bit of a, you know, he's a bit of a goody-goody, you know, in that kind of way of where you do kind of rebel as a teenager about, you know, from the things that perhaps you may have liked 4 or 5 years ago, when you were a little bit younger. But, you know, going into my 20s and sort of going into sort of more adulthood, I realised how much this film is just a part of, like, for me, it's part, like, there's a reason we're releasing this episode on the 28th of December, because it feels like it's a Christmassy film. Even though yes, there are elements where it's at Christmas in, that doesn't necessarily make it a Christmas film. And actually, those elements are very, very short.
It goes through the whole year, doesn't it? It goes through the whole seasons and the whole year of school.
Well, you know, what was it? A couple of years ago, we decided, let's watch a Harry Potter film every weekend up to Christmas. And that felt like a thing. You know, that's a thing that I know a lot of people do. ITV, certainly in the UK, they certainly start doing that when it gets to that time of year. You know, mid to late November, they start putting the Harry Potter films on every weekend, and it does just feel like, you know, and I wonder how much of that actually goes back to kind of John Williams' score, which does sound very reminiscent of Home Alone, which is our last episode. Go back and have a listen to that if you haven't already. But those scores are very, very similar, but not in a way where it just feels like a carbon copy. But they have that same magic, for, you know, to
choice of a better word,
excuse the pun, but it has that magic and that sparkle to it, where it does feel like a bit of a Christmassy time. It does feel like it's this own kind of entity in this own world.
It's got all that kind of, even the first part where you start on Privet Drive, and you've got, what is it? It's that like ding 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 bit where he's like turning like the lights out and stuff.
Yeah.
And it's just sort of setting up the scene. And although I was thinking when we watched it yesterday again, I was like, how, like, you've got two blooming, like, you've got a witch and a wizard standing in the middle of a cul-de-sac in England, turning out the lights, and there's no neighbourhood watch twitching some curtains. Thinking,
and that
is
that is definitely a street / cul-de-sac that would be curtain twitching and being like
that bloody moment Hagrid comes in on his frigging motorbike, and like they'd all be there out there. They'd be like, "What's this?" They'd be on their WhatsApp groups going, "What's going on?"
You know what it's like at my mum and dad's house if somebody starts like driving a little bit too close to the road. It's like, oh, yeah,
who's that? Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, of those kind of plot holes are kind of there. You kind of have to suspend your disbelief ever so slightly, as much as the fact of, you know, it's complete magic and wizardry, all of those things.
Magic's real though.
But I think you hit the nail on the head there, where when you first see that element of magic in the film, which obviously this film is all about magic, it's all about, you know, fantasy and all of these things. When that first moment where he starts taking the lights out from the street lamps, every time those bulbs come to his wand or whatever happens, it does have that, oh my God, what's happening? You know, where you are a little bit kind of in amazement almost, you know, and yeah, it has that magic and that sparkle, and the amazement is only compounded the younger you are. But I can remember watching it that when I was, you know, 9, 10, and thinking, I was just in total amazement, which obviously this is who this film is marketed at. And I think it's one of those lovely films where actually it is actually for all of the family. You know, you do get those kids films that are purely for the child, and the parents are pulling their hair out going, I can't believe, why does my child like this? Whereas this is actually one of those films where, you know, my mum and dad would have watched it, and I know that when they watched it, they're, oh, that's pretty good, Dad, that's really good. And obviously at their time, when they're watching it, when I was a kid, they're recognising who the actors are, who the people are, and what they've been in. I'm just seeing the characters.
Yeah,
so it does appeal to both of those markets.
It's a different level of enjoyment due to, I suppose, age. As you say, you've got obviously the nostalgia for your sort of parents and their age, because, like you said, they're seeing the actors. They're, oh, what have they been in? Or I wouldn't have thought they'd do this and all that sort of stuff.
They were essentially doing the whole, oh, let's look at IMDb to see what they've been in, but not at the time, because mobile phones weren't as prevalent and definitely couldn't go on the internet at the time. But they were doing that in their heads. Oh, what's he been in? Oh, he was in that episode of Coronation Street or whatever it is.
But I know, like, in terms of the story side of things, only really watching it when you're older do I actually understand the story and what I'm trying to follow. When I was a child, I would, as you say, just been watching it for, Well, they're witches, they're wizards, they're flying.
You remember it in moments, don't you? So
Yeah.
you remember the point. You remember that image of Harry, flying on the wand, going after Neville's. Remember
Flying on the wand?
flying on the
broom?
broom. Sorry, that was in later films.
How about on the roof?
Yeah, you remember that because it's visually quite pleasing. You remember him sticking the wand up the troll's nose,
Yeah.
and being shaken around. You don't necessarily remember the, Dumbledore telling Harry, that mirror, shows you what you desire. Don't really remember that. You just remember the images more than anything, and what I would call the set pieces.
The bit where Snape's talking to Professor Quirrell and when Harry's got the invisibility cloak on.
You don't really remember what they're talking about. You just remember that. I know that I remember the feeling of being like, oh my God, Harry's going to get caught.
Yeah.
Don't really know like what. It is that thing of, that's kind of part of the magic of it, to be a pun again, is that it has all of those wonderful set pieces that are very visually striking and are things that you can immediately picture in your mind. But it does, as you get older, or if you watched it when you were older, it has that very intricate story with lots of interesting things going on. Obviously this would have come from the books, but the world it creates and its world building is absolutely on point.
Yeah, just it's that opening shot of when, say, you've already obviously got the train station part. Actually, let's go back. You've had Diagon Alley for a start.
Diagon Alley.
Sorry, Diagon Alley. And you're going, as you say, and then you've got like Gringotts, and then you go and then you get to the train station, and then it's like platform 9 3/4. You're having a laugh.
Think you're being funny, do you?
Funny, do you?
Platform 9 3/4.
And it's just all these things that are just that little bit weird and wonderful. And then you get that final thing where you actually, because you don't know at this point, if you haven't read the books, what does Hogwarts look like? Until you get that bit where we're on the boats and then the camera pans up and it's like, oh, that is Hogwarts.
Yeah, like, obviously a lot of the description and a lot of the characters and the settings and all of those things will have been, taken very much from the books and its description in the books. But to actually convert that to screen to the point where I when I read, I find it very difficult to picture characters, which is why I like reading books that are based off of films or TV, where I can see those things very clearly.
Especially if you've almost already got an image in your head.
Exactly. Yeah. Rather,
whether right or wrong, you've got an image in your head.
Exactly. And I wonder, for people who had read the books prior to that, how close that was to what they pictured, because that is an experience, unfortunately, that I will never really have, because I always saw the film first. So but just across the board, this was just a very, very well made film. It wasn't. There were very few flaws in this, if any. And I appreciate nostalgia maybe taking hold a little bit, but I can't think of any like real glaring criticisms that you could have of this.
No, I think the only thing now when you sort of rewatch it back now is, okay, yes, some of the CGI is a bit obvious. It's CGI, like the bit where Harry's on the top of the troll's shoulders in the girls' bathroom, getting fwanged around. Like, you can clearly tell that's CGI.
Yeah, I mean,
what else is there? There's something else that's really glaringly obvious. Oh, when Neville falls down
off of the
roof and gets caught on the little spikes coming down. That's really obvious. It's not him.
I think it holds up quite well, considering it's 23 years old when we watched it yesterday.
Yeah, goodness, yeah.
So and usually I'm a staunch advocate for using practical effects rather than CGI. But here, I don't really see that as a problem, because I think when you are working with things that do have to be almost otherworldly and do have to be, you can't see through the illusion, if that makes sense. And I think with practical effects, one of the drawbacks of that is that sometimes you can quite easily see how it's done, no matter how good the effect may be. And I think so. That, I think it held up particularly well here. But I think I'm just going to go through, the crew who worked on this film. So this was directed by Chris Columbus, who also directed Home Alone. So that's where those comparisons are very easy to make because, you've got the same director in the helm. He's also the guy who directed Mrs. Doubtfire. He's also the guy who directed the 2005 film version of Rent, which I know for you will be a bit of a mind blow moment. But generally speaking, Chris Columbus, Jingle All the Way, writer of The Goonies, a very, very established director, writer, producer by the time 2001 came around and this film was being made. The screenplay was written by Steve Kloves, who'd worked on things like Flesh and Bone, Fabulous Baker Boys, Wonder Boys. Produced by David Heyman, who subsequently went on to work on things like Gravity, Marriage Story, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the Tarantino film. Obviously composed by the wonderful John Williams. I don't need to go through his credentials because we would be here for quite a while. And the cinematographer was John Seale, who has worked on things like Witness, The English Patient, Cold Mountain. So across the board, some very well-established filmmakers in their own right. And I think part of the beauty of these filmmakers is how much they let the cast shine.
Yep.
Another thing I said yesterday, across the board, I cannot find a single fault with any of the castings that were made, not only in this film, but in all the subsequent films. I don't think there's anybody really, other than people who just want to criticise. I don't think there's anybody who would go, I didn't like the casting of this person as that character.
And I think that would only come if you'd read all of the books first and had a completely different take on what someone was meant to look like compared to what it ended up being. But for us, I know that everyone is that person. Harry Potter will only ever be Daniel Radcliffe, no matter how much, if you start going into like Fantastic Beasts and chucking in Eddie Redmayne, that's not Harry Potter to me.
Well, he's not Harry Potter.
Is he not Harry Potter? Am I getting this wrong?
Yeah. Fantastic Beasts is set.
I fell asleep.
It's set in the 20s and 30s.
Oh.
That's why he's got a young Dumbledore.
Oh, he's not dumb.
Jude Law's Dumbledore in the Fantastic Beasts.
I didn't like Fantastic Beasts, as you can tell.
Yeah, it
eliminated it.
Yeah,
it was awful.
But
sorry.
But I think potentially that's where the Fantastic Beasts fell down a little bit. Is that the casting potentially wasn't quite as on point as it had been here. So I think just to go through the cast. Obviously, you've got Daniel Radcliffe, Rupert Grint, and Emma Watson playing Harry Potter, Ron Weasley, and Hermione Granger. That's really important. You get those three right because you're going to be spending 15 years with these characters, and essentially you're spending 15 years with these actors as they grow up. So you need to get that right. And actually, in recent years, I for some reason had a bit of a memory that in the first film the acting was a bit rubbish from the kids.
So did I. Yeah.
But actually, it's not.
I think out of everyone, because I think it was always a case that everyone was a bit on Emma Watson because they felt she was just a bit.
I think she has the clearest character.
Oh yeah, her character's definitely clear. But I always thought Rupert Grint's acting was probably the best out of the three of them in that first film. And I don't know why, just always that he was, because he's that comedy element. And I don't know, sometimes comedy's harder
needs to sort out her priorities.
This is Scabbers. Yeah, it's just, I just feel like for how young they were, and because they were all unknowns, weren't they, when this
I think
came
Daniel Radcliffe he'd been in a TV movie called Copperfield with Bob Hoskins.
Okay.
But he wasn't a known name. I wouldn't have said he wasn't the equivalent of a Macaulay Culkin in Home Alone at that point.
Okay.
Or in, The Good Son. He was more unknown than known, Rupert Grint and Emma Watson, I don't think had been in anything prior to this.
No, I feel
This
like
was-
Emma Watson was still in school, because I remember.
Well, they would have all been still
well,
in
yeah,
school, wouldn't
but-
they?
You know what I mean, though? Because
Yeah.
there was, from what I remember, and as I say, people won't know what this is, but I used to do a dance competition in school, and Emma Watson used to take part in this dance competition that used to go up and down the UK country,
Which was called?
Rock Challenge, or Global Rock, depending on what part of the country you come from. And she used to take part in it. And obviously, she was still taking part of it when she was in Harry Potter.
Which, ironically, you could say she needed to sort out her priorities.
Yeah. But it's quite interesting that they almost still had, I suppose, an element of a semi-normal life. Because I don't think after Philosopher's Stone, those three would have blown up as big as maybe after the next 2 or 3 films, maybe.
I think probably they blew up probably after the 3rd film and into the 4th, when they started to become teenagers,
Yeah,
and that's when people started to get crushes and started to,
that's very true. Yes.
for many young boys it would have been Emma Watson. For many, young girls it maybe would have been Ron, or
Absolutely, Ron.
or
It was
Harry.
it was always Rupert Grint, and then the Weird Girls, and I was part of the Weird Girls crew. Tom Felton, Draco Malfoy.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, Draco could get it.
I was about to say you always like a bad boy, but I'm a good boy. So, but to bring it back to the cast before we go down some therapy issues that we need to explore. Yeah, you need to get those. You need to get those 3 that on point, and they did. But I think you could have learned to have loved. I'm not going to say anybody in those roles, but you could have learned to have loved quite a few people.
Yeah,
That's not to take anything away from those 3, but where the supporting cast, that is so important, because those characters are just as important as the 3 main characters. So I'm just going to go through them here, and these names were ingrained and have even become more ingrained since these films in British culture. So you have Richard Harris as Albus Dumbledore, Maggie Smith as Professor McGonagall, Robbie Coltrane as Hagrid, Fiona Shaw as Aunt Petunia Dursley, Richard Griffiths as Uncle Vernon Dursley, Ian Hart as Professor Quirrell, Julie Walters as Mrs. Weasley, John Cleese as Nearly Headless Nick, Warwick Davis as Goblin Bank Teller Professor Flitwick and voice of Griphook, Vern Troyer as Griphook, John Hurt as Mr. Ollivander, David Bradley as Mr. Filch, Alan Rickman as Professor Snape, Zoe Wanamaker as Madam Hooch, to name but a few. Those are British TV and film staples.
Yeah, absolutely.
And not one of them feels out of place.
No.
Not one of them at all feels like, oh, well, I don't really see them as that character.
They all work in their roles so well. Like, I couldn't imagine like switching any of them around to be a different part. Like, I couldn't see Zoe Wanamaker being Professor McGonagall or anything like that. It just doesn't work in my mind. But again, they're all so good as British actors through TV and film that they could have been in any of the parts, but it was just right.
Well, this is the thing, like, Alan Rickman is, before you even get to Professor Snape, Alan Rickman is a really iconic actor. For so many people, he's Hans Gruber from Die Hard. And I think for a lot of people, that could have quite easily been, oh, we're watching Hans Gruber as this teacher in Harry Potter. But the skill of Alan Rickman amongst everybody else in this to go, oh no, that's not Hans Gruber, that's not Alan Rickman, that's Professor Snape. Robbie Coltrane, for a lot of British TV fans, was Cracker, the detective. That's before, there was a point in time where I was like, oh yeah, he was in Cracker. That was quite a good TV show in the sort of late 90s, early noughties, but literally completely transforms into Hagrid. John Cleese, Basil Fawlty, for so many people.
Is it wrong that I thought nearly headless Nick?
Nearly headless? How do you mean nearly headless?
Oh, like this. Ooh. Why did I think he was Brian Connolly?
Brian Connolly shows up later in this, I believe.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's not Brian Connolly.
Literally, I was watching it last night and I was like, oh, it's Brian Connolly. Did not realise it was John Cleese.
It's John Cleese, it's Basil Fawlty.
That is mad. That's blown my mind because I thought it was Brian Connolly. Not even Brian Connolly. No, hang on. Am I thinking of the wrong person?
You're thinking of Billy Connolly.
Billy Connolly.
Billy Connolly.
Billy and his Connolly.
Billy Connolly.
Billy Connolly, yeah.
Yeah, the Scottish comedian.
Yes, that's who I thought it was.
Not Brian Connolly. You've got me doing it now. Not Brian Connolly. It's a puppet.
It's a puppet. No.
Literally, there will be so many US and international listeners
idea what we're on about.
who will be going, what are these people talking
about?
Are
they having a breakdown?
Yeah.
Yes, we are.
Exactly. Yeah, it's not Billy Connolly. I believe he crops up later on, and I can't remember what character he plays. But yeah, John Cleese, for so many people, is Basil Fawlty. Julie Walters, Acorn Antique.
Yeah.
You know, so many of these people are well known for other roles, but somehow become totally mesmerising and transforming into the roles here. Zoe Wanamaker, for example, is definitely, for me, as much the mum in My Family as she is Madam Hooch here.
That's the say. My Family was only what Zoe Wanamaker was. That's what I know her from. Is My Family.
For international viewers, that's a mid-noughties family sitcom on BBC. And that's the thing, like Maggie Smith, a long storied career before she got to there.
Wasn't she in James Bond as like one of the babes?
No, I don't think she was. She's done a lot. For me, Maggie Smith will only ever be Professor McGonagall.
Yeah, it's the same with Alan Rickman. To me, the first thing I ever saw him in, I've never seen Die Hard. I'm sorry.
You have seen Die Hard?
Have I?
Yes.
I probably fell asleep. I don't.
You did fall asleep. Cool. Yeah.
But yeah, to me, Alan Rickman is Snape. That's where I know him from to start with, and then he was Love Actually bloke, the arsehole.
Love Actually bloke. Wow,
the arsehole in Love Actually.
Yeah.
But yeah, he is that. That's all I know him from. But he's had a career so much before that, as a lot of these actors have.
Well, you know, John Hurt, Alien, The Elephant Man,
Doctor Who.
That's
where I know.
Well, Doctor Who was after this, wasn't it?
What,
John and Doctor Who. I swear that was in the David Tennant series.
I thought John Hurt was Doctor Who at one point.
He wasn't Doctor Who.
Was he not Doctor Who at one point? I don't know, but
I mean, if he was, I do apologise. I'm not an expert on Doctor Who, but I don't think he was.
I can't remember.
No, I think he's been in Doctor Who, but it's definitely as like in the newer series, not the the classic series. No. But as I say, up and down the board, the cast list here is on point. And, you know, I mentioned it in our great recastings, but, you know, obviously the character of Albus Dumbledore is a really, really important character to get right, because he's essentially, you know, the guiding light for Harry throughout the whole of the series up until, spoiler alert, he dies. Again, if you haven't seen these, you have been living under a rock, so I'm not worried about spoilers here. But for the first two films, he is Albus Dumbledore, Richard Harris. There is no getting away from that. There is nothing wrong with his portrayal. So, unfortunately, because of his untimely death, he had to be recast. But even the casting of Michael Gambon is so on point and so good. He becomes, you know, I think it's easier for us at that point to see Dumbledore in a different light and to see those different, you know, shades of his character because he's a different actor altogether.
And maybe it was because I was too young, but I certainly didn't realise it had changed actors. Wouldn't have had a clue.
You're not the most observant of cinema viewers, are you?
No, that's very true.
So that's not a very high bar to get past. But that's the thing. His recasting could very much have ruined this whole franchise because all of a sudden, you know, that doesn't work. You know, most recently, the thing I can think of is obviously you've had, you had Henry Cavill in The Witcher, who everybody seemed to like as that character, and then he's been recast with Liam Hemsworth, and it just hasn't worked.
I've not even seen anything of Liam Hemsworth.
That's because we got bored. because
Did we actually even start watching it? With
we
Liam
did.
Hemsworth?
No, because we didn't want to watch it.
Oh,
But that's the point. A lot of people have done.
yeah.
That casting is another one that I can think of is Ron Perlman as Hellboy being changed to David Harbour, who he does his own work, but for so many people, Ron Perlman is Hellboy, and I think that could have totally derailed this franchise before it really ever started to get going, or at least it would have had a lot of detractors. But they got that on point as well, and I can't think of another film, or certainly another film with a long franchise, where every single addition to that franchise and piece of casting in that franchise is so on point, is so good, that you feel like those people are those characters, and it's very, very difficult to see anybody else in those roles.
I'd say Lord of the Rings probably.
That's probably
pretty blooming.
I can't really comment on that because I've never seen Lord of the Rings, so I know I can hear loads of people with their pitchforks right now.
Get out your torch and pitchforks.
I've never seen the Lord of the Rings, and it's interesting because that came out relatively the same sort of time.
But weirdly, I remember seeing Lord of the Rings in the cinema, and that might just have been because my dad loved it and he'd read it when he was younger. But I remember actually going and seeing the 3-hour-long Lord of the Rings.
That's probably why. And so it's very, very hard to do. There's, you could probably count the amount of films that are able to do that on one hand. So it's a real testament to that casting for it to get to that point where you go, yeah, that person is that character.
Because I suppose it kind of goes back to, like, obviously things like James Bond. You're continuously changing who James Bond is.
And that's what I mean. Like, that obviously has 26, 27 films. And you will have people say, oh, well, my favourite Bond is Sean Connery. Oh, no, my favourite Bond is this. For me, my favourite Bond is Pierce Brosnan. And I think that's part of the danger. Obviously, that's gone on for a much longer period of time. But even in, for example, those films where you have a new character in that particular story for that particular film and they come in, you get people who are like, oh, I didn't really like that villain in that one. Oh, I didn't really like that. Whereas I don't really hear that with this,
No.
Thinking on to Chamber of Secrets, obviously you bring in Kenneth Branagh playing a professor. I can't think of the professor's name, but essentially the con man who writes about all of these, Professor Gilderoy Lockhart.
Oh, Gilderoy Lockhart, yeah.
Writes about all of these, amazing adventures that he's had, but actually he hasn't done any of them, and he's just a fraud. That's a very good piece of casting. Again, you get later editions when it has Ralph Fiennes playing Voldemort. I said his name. That's a very important. And it
Robert Pattinson, Cedric Diggory.
Across the board, there isn't a bad piece of casting in any of those movies.
Nah.
Even the...
Was it Barty Crouch, David Tennant?
Yes, he's the... Yeah.
No, is that Bart? He's not Barty Crouch, sorry.
I don't know the name, but David Tennant is in this. Yeah, you get Brendan Gleeson as Mad Eye Moody.
Yeah, he's good.
So many great characters that have to have great performers, and every single one works. And I'm a big sort of like staunch advocate of having having kid actors have to be really good, otherwise they become annoying. One of my favourite films is Jurassic Park. The kids in that film do get a little bit annoying at certain points, not all the time, but the reason why that film is so good is because they're not massively annoying.
It's a little bit annoying.
a little bit annoying. The kids here don't really get annoying, even if you look at the supporting cast members. The guy who plays Neville, I'll fight you. When he's trying to stop three. When does it come? He comes when they're gonna go and get the Philosopher's Stone and stop Snape. And Neville comes out and he says, "You can't do this. You're gonna get a Gryffindor. More points taken off. I'll fight you."
Oh yeah.
And then I'm sorry about this, Neville. Yeah. Malfoy. You have to get that. That antagonistic character. You have to hate that actor. You have to hate that kid. And that is perfect.
Oh yeah.
So
much good casting.
Can't think of the full name, but Seamus. You know, he's a great.
Seamus Finnegan.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for me, he looks like Wayne Rooney.
Yes, he does.
but you know, you love that character. You know, you love all of the characters that you really kind of end up seeing.
I have new Harf and Hum. I can't do the accent.
Yeah, I think you should stop, otherwise we're going to get in hot water, because that was definitely not Irish.
Scottish.
Oh, here we go. I know geography is not on your strong point.
Neither are accents.
No, I think everybody listening can tell. But as I say, casting, you know, not to repeat myself too much, but to have a long-lasting franchise that is very successful, to have almost every single character, and I'm sure there will be people who perhaps, you know, have thoughts either way, but for me personally, there isn't a single character in this franchise who I go, I don't like the casting of that person. And there are many other franchises where I'm going, actually, as much as I like that franchise, or as much as I like those series of films, that, you know, that casting there isn't particularly great. They could have got somebody a little bit better there, or somebody more suited to the role. Whereas this just doesn't happen for me in this at all.
And I think as well, because obviously, sadly, a lot of those actors have now passed away, but the roles that they created have almost solidified them as actors and their careers, like, and continue to bring their roles and their parts to generations to come is what's good about this franchise and the films as a whole. And it means that those actors never, in a really weird sense, never die, even though they're long and gone, some of them, and some more recently, sadly, but they will always live on in the hearts of
and that you know, that is the beauty of cinema, really, is that these people who, you know, naturally, you know, passing away is part of, you know, life. You do get that immortality of Hollywood and of cinema, whereby you can stick on that person's work. You know, Alan Rickman, for example. You know, I know that was quite devastating when the world lost him, and it's so nice to have something there, which I think people will be a lot more able to work their way up through Alan Rickman's work because of this franchise, because you start as a youngish kid watching the Harry Potter films, and then you grow up and you perhaps your interests and your film taste become perhaps a little bit more mature, and you then may go, oh, I may watch a Love Actually because it's got Severus Snape in. I may watch a Die Hard because it's got Severus Snape in. And, you know, I don't think that the power of that can be understated, really. You know, I think the amount of times you put on a film, or we put on a film, and go, oh, should we put that on? And you go, I don't know. And I go, oh, it's got such and such in it. And because you like their work, you end up putting that film on. And sometimes you go, oh, that was actually really good. I didn't think that'd be any good, but because it had X in, you know. So I don't think the power of that can really be understated there. And it is quite interesting because, you know, I've seen some of the names that have been thrown out in, you know, in these potential castings, and they could have been very different in some places.
Okay.
So in the role of Albus Dumbledore, this will be a name that perhaps you're not familiar with, but any fans of the 60s TV show The Prisoner will be familiar with. But the name Patrick McGoohan could have been in the role of Dumbledore, and unfortunately only ended up turning it down due to health reasons, which led to Richard Harris, you know, agreeing to take on the part, but mainly after his 11-year-old daughter threatened to never speak to him again if he didn't. So we can thank the granddaughter of Richard Harris for getting him into the role of Albus Dumbledore. And obviously Richard Harris's son, Jared Harris, is a very accomplished actor in his own right.
Know that.
We could have had, there is quite a funny story, actually. So there was also, obviously, much like there's Nearly Headless Nick, there was also going to be another poltergeist called Peeves, who was to be played by, I'm not going to say his name just but I'm going to tell you the story and see if you can guess what kind of person this sounds like. So he doesn't appear in any of the in the movie or as deleted scenes because he was cut from the movie. And upon release of the movie, he was interviewed about this and said, he was asked, what how do you feel about it? He says, well, no offense, actually, full offense, I was deleted from this film, and anyway, the film is shit. Who do you think might have said this in a slightly jovial way?
Someone like Rick Mail?
On the nose,
Yeah.
Rick Mail.
Was it really?
Yeah, he was due to be in this. He played the character of the poltergeist Peeves. Fortunately, he got cut from the film, and not even in deleted scenes or home editions of the movie. So unfortunately, we've not really been able to see it.
That's really because I remember I've heard of Peeves.
That's the thing, and Rick Mail is such a lovable kind of character actor and comedian that you do kind of wish he was in something like this, because it does feel like something he should be a part of.
He's one of those British actors that you almost kind of go, why is he not? But obviously he was meant to be, but...
Well, he unfortunately was cut from the...
so annoying.
So in the role of Severus Snape, we almost didn't have Alan Rickman. We could have had the actor Tim Roth.
Who?
You do know who Tim Roth is. He is in Lie to Me. He's in Pulp Fiction. If I just get a picture of Tim Roth up, that's probably the easiest way, isn't it?
Probably, because I don't know.
But, so apparently he was due to be in the film. But he was also cast in... That is Tim Roth right there.
Okay. Has he been in Batman?
No, he hasn't been in Batman, but he's been in things like Rob Roy, Pulp Fiction, Planet of the Apes, Hateful Eight.
He weirdly looks like the dude who plays Green Goblin.
Oh, Willem Dafoe.
Yeah.
It's not Willem Dafoe.
No.
It's Tim Roth.
Fair enough.
He was apparently a contender for the role of Severus Snape.
Ooh, no.
And was originally going to play him, according to sources. But he was also cast as General Thade in Tim Burton's adaptation of Planet of the Apes. And that meant him working over in LA, and he felt he wouldn't have been able to, properly give his best work in either production if he'd have been flying back from Pinewood Studios and going over to LA. So he actually chose Planet of the Apes, which I think is probably his loss, because that Planet of the Apes film is deeply flawed. And in the grand scheme of things, certainly in terms of the paycheck, yes, okay, he might have made more money on Planet of the Apes than he did here, but he certainly wouldn't have had, the stardom that he could have had. And he's a big star anyway, but I feel like the love of Alan Rickman has only been compounded by his role as Severus Snape, certainly for younger viewers.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the role of Harry, now this actually goes back to what we were saying earlier. So you may not recognise the actor's name, but a guy called Gabriel Thompson was considered for the role of Harry. But if I tell you what he is known for, you will go, oh my God. So he is the youngest son in my family. And he's a co-star of Zoe Wanamaker.
Oh, him! Okay, yeah, I could see that.
Apparently he was considered, but obviously they went for Daniel Radcliffe as well.
Very interesting.
And an actor who did end up becoming part of the Harry Potter franchise in David Thewlis, who ended up playing Professor Lupin in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, was also considered for the role of Professor Quirrell, as opposed to Ian Hart. I can see that working quite well, but obviously that would have meant we wouldn't have got David Thewlis as Professor Lupin, who, as everybody has already established by listening to this episode, is a great piece of casting. In the role of Dumbledore as well, we could have had Sir Alec Guinness, who...
Okay, yeah.
Do you know who Sir Alec Guinness is?
Thinks off the top of my head.
So what is Sir Alec Guinness most well known for?
I don't know.
You don't know who he is, do you?
I think I do, but I don't know what
if you knew who he was, you'd be able to say.
No, go on then.
So he plays Obi-Wan Kenobi in the original Star Wars films.
Is that the beardy dude?
These are not the droids you're looking for.
Yes, I do know who you're on
He
about.
plays
Yeah,
Ben
yeah.
Kenobi,
Yeah.
Obi-Wan Kenobi. He was also in other things as well, but that's obviously what he's most well known for. That again could have worked.
Yeah, it could have done.
There is actually quite a ongoing joke between Sir Patrick Stewart and Sir Ian McKellen, who often claim that they're the only two actors in Great Britain who weren't asked to participate in the Harry Potter movies. There are more actors who weren't asked to be in it, but they joke amongst themselves that they weren't asked. But I could see, obviously, those comparisons between Gandalf and Dumbledore are very, very clear. To be fair, I could see Sir Patrick Stewart doing a Dumbledore.
Doing a Dumbledore.
Yeah, I mean that sounds like a phrase you use when you're being very wise. He's doing a Dumbledore.
He's doing a Dumbledore. Could have been Dumbledore's gay lover.
Yeah, it could have been. Yeah. There's a really funny story actually with Tom Felton's casting as Draco Malfoy. So obviously a lot of the child actors had to go through extensive casting. That Tom Felton got down to the some of the final rounds of auditioning, and Chris Columbus, the director, was asking each contender for the role of Malfoy, what's your favourite part of the book series? Or, at this time it would have been, probably the first couple, but what's your favourite part of the book? And when it got to Tom Felton's turn, he said his favourite part was the part at Gringotts. And the reason he said that is because that is what the previous contender had said. So they asked him all in a line, and what's your favourite part, and what's your favourite part? Tom Felton just hadn't read the books and goes, yeah, Gringotts, like the person next to him. And apparently Columbus saw through that quite clearly, but thought it was quite funny. And apparently that lent himself a little bit to the casting of Malfoy because of that, that very sort of quick thinking. So, casting, we could have had some very, very different, different actors in different roles here. But I do just want to circle back a little bit to kind of like critic and audience reception, because it's one of the few films actually that has a very similar critical reception to audience reception. Like usually critically, films are received a little bit lower than what an audience reception is. Not always. Sometimes it fluctuates, but generally speaking, and this is one of the films that actually has a very similar critical reception. I just want to read what perhaps the most well-known movie critic Roger Ebert wrote about the film in 2001 after seeing it. So obviously, at that time, it was called Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. So forgive English viewers it being called that for this quote. But during Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, I was pretty sure I was watching a classic, one that will be around for a long time and make many generations of fans. It takes time to be good. It doesn't hammer the audience with easy thrills, but cares to tell a story and to create its characters carefully.
Nice.
And I completely 100% agree with that. I think, he's obviously put it far more eloquently than I could, because all of those characters are very, very clear characters, if that makes at all any sense as a statement to make. And what I mean by that is everybody feels different from each other. Everybody feels like an individual, much like people are in life. A lot of the time in films, particularly badly written films, the characters feel very much like they're archetypes, and they don't feel fully fleshed out. They're there purely only to, get the scene to the next scene, or they're only there just because they need a line here or a line there, for example. Whereas here, even the characters that have one line, like, I'm picturing the scene when they go into that pub where they go out the back and, start going out to Diagon Alley. Everybody in there feels very much like they have their own backstory and their own.
Yes.
Nobody feels like, oh, he's just a guy in a pub. Nobody really feels like that. And that, obviously that goes back to the writing of the book. So, those books are very well written. But to actually convey that from page to screen and from a novel page to a screenplay page to screen is a very, very hard thing, to transition into.
VHS is yesterday's news. Out with the old and in with the new. You heard it here first. Betamax is where it is happening. And the only place to start your collection is the Willie Parks Betamax Parlor. We have all the greats and the hidden gems you've never heard of. Like the Crocodile Killer, Which Way is West and How Do I Get There? And of course, the classic, And Maggots Ate My Homework. That's just the tip of the iceberg. All you need is a thirst for the silver screen and a compatible Betamax player to enjoy everything we have to offer at Willie Parks' Betamax Parlor. You don't even need a membership, just imagination. Located opposite the Little Chef on the Walworth Road, ask for Willie and you could be one step closer to Betamax satisfaction.
But one of the things that we've kind of been discussing is that in the UK it's known as Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. In the US it's known as Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. So apparently this was because the US publisher Scholastic changed the title and the corresponding text to Sorcerer's Stone because they believed that the American audience were largely unfamiliar with the Philosopher's Stone concept. So to keep the movie consistent with the book, every scene in the movie where the Philosopher's Stone is mentioned was filmed twice. One with the cast members saying philosophers and one with them saying sorcerers. And obviously, if you get this film in the US, it will be sorcerers. I think it's doing the US audience a little bit of a disservice by that publisher. Yeah. Because I don't think you necessarily need to be familiar with the Philosopher's Stone concepts. Like, for me, the Philosopher's Stone is Harry Potter. Obviously, this alludes to the fact that it is a pre-existing concept or, something that is, has its own story aside from Harry Potter. But I don't think it needed to have that change. And I think it does the US audience a bit of a disservice because it kind of implies that they're not that intelligent or not.
Well, no, because I didn't know what a philosopher, let alone a philosopher's stone was.
That's what I mean. And at an age where the majority of your audience is going to be, children, a philosopher and a sorcerer are both probably going to be words where you would have to learn what that meant.
Yeah.
And okay, yes, a sorcerer in its, dictionary definition is perhaps closer to what a wizard would be as opposed to a philosopher. But I don't really think it matters. And I think all that has done really is it makes... So, for example, Americans hearing us say Philosopher's Stone will probably go, oh, that's not right, it's not right. And vice versa. When we hear Sorcerer's Stone, we go, it's not right, it's not right. So I don't think that really needed to have happened. But unfortunately, it did happen. And it's obviously, as far as I'm aware, the only instance in both the book series and the film series where it has a different name in the US than it does to the UK. So that's a very...
Yeah, I think we'd have to YouTube it because I can almost not even picture the actors saying it.
Yeah, it just doesn't feel
like,
and that's
also a stone.
And to be fair, the American audience or international audience who it was changed for, they're probably sitting there saying the same thing. They're probably listening to this podcast saying, "Stop saying philosophers."
Yeah, I don't know what is it.
So I totally understand.
But sorcerer just sounds to me like a saucer and milk, a cup and saucer.
It means a sorcerer as in like a wizard.
Yeah, I know what sorcerer means, but
you're just saying you want a saucer of milk.
I'm not a cat.
Well,
I'm not Professor McGonagall.
Well, that took a very weird sidebar. But another interesting thing is obviously a lot of the scenes in the film are take place in Hogwarts. The actual school. And apparently the filmmakers wanted to use Canterbury Cathedral as a filming location for some of the Hogwarts scenes.
Interesting.
But the Dean of Canterbury refused to allow it, saying that it was unfitting for a Christian church to be used to promote pagan imagery.
Oh,
So, obviously missing the point entirely that this is a film,
Mm.
but there we go.
Fiction.
Let's move on.
Mm.
So, obviously, Chris Columbus directed the film, but here are some other names that were thought about, spoken to, and all the above. So, Steven Spielberg.
I was going to say it's got to be up there.
Like,
yeah.
I mean, Steven Spielberg's version of this would have been just as good
We need a bigger boat.
if not better. You know, I look at films like E.T., which is a very kind of similar, not in terms of themes, not in terms of its actual story, but the themes are very similar.
Mm.
You know, it's a coming of age type,
Yeah.
you know, fish out of water type story. Steven Spielberg, as we know, is probably one of the most talented filmmakers, you know, around. So I would have seen absolutely no problems there.
Mm.
Jonathan Demme could have directed this, who I believe is the director of The Silence of the Lambs, which, I mean, not to say he couldn't have done that, but obviously coming from a background where the films you're making are Silence of the Lambs, Philadelphia,
Oh, wow.
the
blimey,
Manchurian Candidate remake. Not to say, as I say, not to say that he couldn't have done it, but I would say it would have been perhaps a little bit more of a risk for it to have gone to Jonathan Demme. Name like Terry Gilliam.
That would have been good.
So in terms of that sort of fantastical kind of element to it, obviously films like Brazil, and I think what was the other film he done? Did he do Oz the Great and Powerful? He done The Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus. Heath Ledger's last film was Terry Gilliam. So it has that very whimsical, amazing kind of spectacle, and very visually in that fantasy realm. So I could see the correlations there. Wolfgang Peterson, who, as far as I'm aware, done a lot more kind of 90s thriller types films. So Rob Reiner couldn't, maybe, possibly.
What's he done?
So I believe Rob Reiner is the director of A Few Good Men, the naval the naval drama, The Wolf of Wall Street as well.
Oh, yeah.
This is Spinal Tap. So could do comedy, and obviously worked on All in the Family in the 70s. So, I mean, I think it's a harder thing to see. And perhaps the name that I would be most apprehensive for is M. Night Shyamalan.
Yeah. Okay. That would be a whole...
In 2001, we had The Sixth Sense and Unbreakable. Two certainly more mature films with darker themes. So for him to go to what is essentially, you know, aimed much more at children and families would have been a massive, massive risk. And actually, if we see, you know, his next film after Unbreakable is Signs, which was an interesting concept, but certainly not to the same standard as The Sixth Sense and Unbreakable, and then subsequently The Happening, which is a terrible movie but worth a watch because of how bad it is. And he's come back with a couple of not too bad ones like Split and his most recent one, Knock at the Cabin.
Yeah, that's good.
Which was all right, but that would have been a massive, massive risk.
And I don't think it would have done as well. Well, maybe it would have, but
I think the marketing
very different.
It would, yes, very, very different, wouldn't it? I think it would have perhaps been more in theme and tone, as well, if he had total control and it wasn't, you know, here's what we want you to do. We just want you to do what we're saying, essentially. I think it would have been much closer in tone to The Prisoner of Azkaban.
Yes.
Where that obviously is a much darker, film. But up and down the board, there's some actually real sort of like nice sort of instances of the younger actors kind of showing how professional they were and how good they were at being on screen and on camera. So Bonnie Wright, who played Ginny Weasley, in that scene, she's only in that one scene where they're at, is it King's Cross?
Yeah,
King's Cross station.
I think it is.
And whatever station they're at, and they're going to platform 9 3/4, and Harry's just about go straight through the wall. And as that happens, Bonnie Wright, totally off the cuff, decided to go, good luck to
Was
Harry.
that off the cuff? That
And
wasn't
that's
even scripted.
and obviously it wasn't meant to happen, but Chris Columbus was like, that actually worked really well, and left
my
it
goodness. And can obviously like foreshadowing what happens in the future. That's their first like interaction and first like,
Yeah.
that's so interesting.
And obviously, at that point, for the vast majority of for actually all of the viewers, because the books weren't completed at that point, wouldn't have necessarily known that relationship between those two characters, what it would blossom to.
No.
But actually, if you look back at that now, that's kind of the first kind of inkling that actually Ginny Weasley does have, a bit of a crush on Harry. And they wouldn't have known that necessarily at that point. Okay, they may have, spoken to J.K. Rowling and say, well, here's what I'm planning on going, here's where I'm going with that. But I don't necessarily, I think that's just a nice case of happenstance where it just happens to fall in line with, the things that they're thinking and the things that they're kind of working towards.
That's really interesting, that.
But we almost had a completely different set of Harry Potter films. So before this film was made and was commissioned to be made as what we ended up seeing, Warner Brothers were originally considering making the whole franchise a set of animated movies.
Okay.
Attempting to combine, I think, several of the novels into a single film. And the studio's reasoning mainly had to do with concerns over using child actors, and obviously the rapidly, at that point in childhood, you're rapidly aging. And I think you can kind of see what they mean from that concern, because I think it's Prisoner of Azkaban feels like a very different film, not only because of how it's directed and the darker themes, but also if you look at Harry, Hermione and Ron in the first two films, which were filmed in 2000 and 2001 respectively. Prisoner of Azkaban, it's like, oh, they've had a growth spurt.
They've hit puberty.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I can kind of understand it. However, I think they made a very shrewd choice in not doing that, because I feel like what they may have been somewhat successful, but they certainly wouldn't have got the heights that they were. And they're probably at some point they would have decided, let's make a live action version of them.
Yeah, and then you would have had probably completely different.
Well, it would have been, you'd have been looking 5-6 years later potentially. In which case, Daniel Radcliffe, Ron Weasley, Daniel Radcliffe, Rupert Grint, and I almost said Hermione Granger. Emma Watson, they would all be, far too old to play those roles. So you'd have had to have gone for people much more close to the ages.
But it would have been interesting to see if they'd have actually got almost where they are now and as famous as they are, if they hadn't have.
I think I certainly think Daniel Radcliffe would have done, because I think one thing I like about Daniel Radcliffe in today's cinema is he hasn't kind of rested on his laurels. Like, obviously I know there's kind of outside parameters, but Macaulay Culkin very much became a child star, and then he got a little bit older and didn't really do much. I know obviously there are other parameters that affected that, but with Daniel Radcliffe, he obviously done the Harry Potter franchise, and then the things he was starting to do were very, very different. And I think he obviously really wanted to kind of separate himself as, yes, that's what I will always be known for, but I am so much more than that.
Yeah.
I always remember I can't remember, I think it's something to do with Pegasus.
Equus,
sorry. in the West End,
Mm.
and obviously, that play is a renowned play, but takes some acting chops.
Because he gets naked as well.
Well, there is that, but that's not necessarily why I would go and see it.
That's why I wanted to see it.
Exactly. But even things like, I think it's called Imperium, where he plays a neo-Nazi or plays an undercover FBI agent who goes undercover as a neo-Nazi. He took roles which weren't just by the numbers. So I really do respect that. Not that Rupert Grint and Emma Watson haven't gone on to do things that are, good. It's just a case of, I feel like Daniel Radcliffe perhaps had the most pressure on him coming out of the franchise, because essentially it's his franchise. It's called Harry Potter.
Yeah, you are Harry Potter. That is who you are, and you'll never kind of get away from it.
Yeah. And which, to be fair, all of them have that, but I feel like definitely more. Yeah. But in the original draft, Drew Barrymore, who is a self-proclaimed Harry Potter fan, apparently had a cameo. So we could have seen Drew Barrymore in some capacity here. Originally, obviously, Steve Kloves ended up writing the screenplay along with J.K. Rowling, but screenwriter Michael Goldenberg apparently wrote a draft of the script, but this was ultimately rejected by David Heyman in favour of Steve Kloves' draft because of the way in which he focused on the characters Harry, Hermione and Ron, and focused on their relationship rather than focusing so much on the wizardry of the kind of setup. So I kind of respect that a little bit. And I've just got some other nice little trivia tidbits to throw out at you. So this movie has the distinction of, at the time, I'm not quite sure if now it still holds the record, but at the time it has the distinction of opening on more screens in the US than any other film. So this was released in 3,762 theatres across the US, which is the most for a film at that time, and I'm not sure, may still be the case, but certainly at the time. John Williams, who obviously composed the music for this particular film, has done so without seeing a single frame of the film. He just composed the music.
That's insane.
Which can be, and apparently it can be found on the soundtrack as the prologue. As of March 2002, he had only done this once before, and that was for Steven Spielberg's Hook.
Interesting.
So if you needed convincing about the skill of John Williams, that just kind of highlights it a little bit there. This was the highest grossing movie of 2001.
Yeah.
Not that difficult to kind of believe there. And it had the biggest opening weekend in history, breaking the record set by The Lost World, Jurassic Park. And it was also the first non-sequel to break the record since Jurassic Park.
Wow.
So again, just highlighting how influential and how popular this franchise was. It really does go to show, how many people paid their hard-earned money to go and have a look and see what Harry Potter and the Philosopher's / Sorcerer's Stone was all about.
Yeah, absolutely. And it lives on now and keeps, even after every watch, always something new pops out or keeps getting better and better. And
well, we said this yesterday, didn't we? That we spent a lot of the time watching the background to see who, the extras, what have they gone on to do? Because I think, that, for certainly English fans, there's quite a few people who have gone on to be in different things that we've gone, that's such and such from that. So one for me is, I remember a character called Chelsea who was in EastEnders. She's in one of the films here. So it was quite interesting watching it and looking for those, recognisable faces in the background. So lasting kind of thoughts with Harry Potter and the Philosopher's / Sorcerer's.
I just think it's a film that never gets old, I don't think. And I think there will always be the whole franchise of it will continue to get passed down from generations to generations because it is just so timely. It's just you all, I think everyone, no matter young or old, wants an element of forgetting the real world sometimes and just being able to sit down for two and a bit hours and be completely transported to a different world. And I think that is what this film and this franchise does so well, is that you can just live in this other world for 2.5 hours.
Yeah, 100%. I think, you can lose yourself in it. And I think one thing that's really interesting about it is you can lose yourself in a different world with each film. This number one feels very different from number two. Number two feels very different from number three, and etc. So by the time we get to Deathly Hallows Part 2, we feel like we've been on this massive journey with these characters. Because you have, I certainly remember going to see Deathly Hallows in the cinema, and afterwards, and at that time, not necessarily being massively into Harry Potter to the point that I am now, where it is a bit more like a tradition. But you do feel like there was this sort of like really emotional kind of moment of like, oh, that's the end. That is,
done. Yeah.
Here's where we were when we started, and here's where we are now. And I think it does all go back to this first film. If this film isn't as successful, isn't quite as on point with its script, isn't quite as on point with its casting, or in any way, shape or form different from what we actually have with this film, I think it prevents us getting to the stage, the stages we get to later on. So let's look at some further watching then, just to tie us off. So what would you recommend to people who perhaps have seen this and the rest of the Harry Potter series and were looking for something similar, or things that they may like? What sort of things would you pick out, if anything? Would you like me to start?
I think you should start.
Yeah, because I got a feeling you haven't thought about this.
No.
Okay, so one thing I sort of picked out was, obviously, if you've only seen this one, go and watch the rest of the Harry Potter series. I can't believe there'll be too many people listening who haven't. If you haven't, I would recommend that in the first instance. Another film series which I think would, lend itself quite nicely to fans of Harry Potter would be the Hunger Games series. I know you're not a massive fan of it, but I think it has those that very similar, I suppose it has that very similar world building. Another one would be the Chronicles of Narnia. That's, again, very similar in its, obviously completely different story, but very similar in that you have younger main characters who grow up with as the franchise goes on. And lastly, bit of an oddball one and slightly darker in tone, but Lemony Snicket's A Series of Unfortunate Events.
Yeah, that could be good.
I think that would be either the film with Jim Carrey or the TV series with Neil Patrick Harris.
I always forget he's in that TV series.
Yeah. So have you got any further watching to add to that? And it's perfectly okay if you don't.
I suppose there's an element of Twilight, I suppose, kind of falls into...
Well, we haven't really mentioned that rivalry, did we?
No.
There is that. There was certainly a period of time where, a bit like in Twilight, you were Team Jacob or Team Edward. In this, you were either Team Potter or Team Twilight.
Yeah.
And I certainly fell on the Potter side of the battle there. So I think I can see that quite easily. Obviously, slightly different and a bit more of a. I think I may be making a bit of a generalisation, but I feel like that lends itself more to fans of like romance kind of things, perhaps because that's kind of the main, crux of that story.
Lord of the Rings.
I would have mentioned that, but I haven't seen them, so I can't really recommend them to people.
They are good. They are good. They are worth a watch. They're long, but they are worth it.
And I feel like I'm going to have to delve into that world.
You are going to have to delve into Lord of the Rings
I
and the
think I
Hobbit
will.
and everything.
Yeah.
Visit the Michael Caine Tangerine Emporium for all your citrus fruit needs. Visit us in-store to peruse our limitless supply of Burmese citrus fruits, plus browse our selection of Lunchables. Or shop online using discount code I Bloody Told You to receive a 10% discount on our lean, mean tangerine machine for all your juicing needs. That's the Michael Caine Tangerine Emporium, Bond Street, London, England. We have tangerines the size of rubies.
Unfortunately, it's come to that time in the episode where we have to say goodbye. We hope you've enjoyed the episode as much as we've enjoyed recording it for you. Don't forget to like and subscribe from wherever you get your podcasts from, and also head over to our social media platforms to stay up to date. We thank you for listening to Jimmy Murphy, Hannah and Ryan Etherington. Together, we are Bury Our Bones with Cinema, and we wish you a very happy new year. And it will be a one-button job. Boom, 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 toom, toom, toom.
I have a terrible tendency to just scroll about and record. But if you're talking, when we're doing it, I still find it slightly distracting.
It's a bit weird, but I think it's a bit weird, but I suppose...
Maybe if you listen to it back, see if it sounds... I was like, I'm going to have to stop it. You listen to it back,
Good job I observed that well, wasn't it?